All right, if you've ever tried to learn a new language, I bet you've asked yourself this one super frustrating question. I mean, it's a real mystery, right? You see these little toddlers and they just soak up language like a sponge. They get totally fluent and they've never had a single lesson. And then there's us, adults. We can spend years, literally years, in a classroom and still panic trying to just order a coffee. So what's the deal? What is going on here? Well, it turns out the answer is actually hidden deep inside our own heads. What scientists have figured out is that we don't just have one way of picking up a language. Nope. We actually have two completely different ways. The best way to think about it is like this. It's as if we have two different brains for language. There's the toddler brain. That's the one that just effortlessly soaks everything up from the world. But as we get older, we start relying way more on our student brain. You know, the one that hits the books, makes flashcards, and memorizes grammar rules. And understanding the difference between these two, well, that's the whole key. So what exactly are these two paths? Linguists have some official names for them, of course. They call them acquisition and learning. And really, getting the difference between these two is how we're going to crack this whole mystery wide open. Okay, so first up is acquisition. This is your toddler brain doing its thing. It's totally subconscious, it's natural. The goal isn't to learn a language, it's just to communicate, to get what you want. This is exactly how every single one of us mastered our first language, just by being surrounded by it. And then you've got the total opposite, learning. This is your student brain taking over. It's a conscious, deliberate effort. Think classrooms, textbooks, the whole deal. The focus here isn't just on chatting. It's all about getting the rules right, being grammatically correct. Okay, so let's put these two side by side. When you see them in a head-to-head comparison, the differences are just incredibly stark. Just look at the main goal. For acquisition, it's all about meaning. Cookie, you get a cookie. Simple. The message got across, mission accomplished. But for learning, it's all about structure and being accurate. It's about knowing why you have to say it in that specific way, with that specific verb tense. And this chart here really lays it all out. You've got acquisition, which is subconscious and happens naturally, usually at home. Then there's learning, which is conscious, deliberate, and usually happens at school. But look at the outcome. This is huge. Acquisition leads to fluency, while learning aims for accuracy. And check out how they handle mistakes. With acquisition, errors are kind of ignored as long as you get your point across. But with learning, you get corrected right away. Now, this whole idea, this really powerful distinction, it didn't just pop up overnight, no way. It was actually forged in the fire of a massive scientific debate between some of the biggest names in linguistics. So in one corner, you have the absolute legend Noam Chomsky. And back in the mid-20th century, he came out with this idea that was so radical, it completely turned the world of linguistics upside down. What Chomsky said was this: we're born ready for language. He theorized that we have something called a language acquisition device, or LAD for short. Think of it like a tool in our brain that's already loaded with a universal grammar, like a basic blueprint for how all human languages work. So in his view, we don't learn language from zero. We just flip a switch and activate the programming that's already inside us. But not everybody bought it. In the other corner of this debate was the super influential psychologist B.F. Skinner. And he had a much, much simpler explanation. For Skinner, there was no magical LAD in the brain. He said language is just a behavior, and we learn it, like anything else, through imitation and reinforcement. A kid says milk, they get milk. Positive reinforcement. The behavior gets stronger. Super simple, right? But there's a huge hole in this theory. It totally fails to explain how we can create sentences we've never, ever heard before. And that brings us to this classic example, a mistake that almost every kid makes. It sounds wrong, but it's actually a key piece of evidence that helps settle this debate. Think about it. What adult says I gooed to the park? Nobody. So the child isn't imitating anyone. What they've done is subconsciously figured out the rule for the past tense. You add an ed to a verb. They're applying that rule logically, even though it's an irregular verb. This act of creating a new word, this rule generation, is super powerful evidence for Chomsky's side. It suggests we really do have some kind of internal grammar machine. So, where does all this theory leave us, especially those of us trying to learn a new language as adults? Well, enter Stephen Krashen. He's a linguist who came along later and basically built a bridge from all this heavy theory to actual practical advice for second language learners. Krashen came up with 5 big ideas, or hypotheses, that pretty much changed the game for language teaching. Now, we're not going to go through every single one, but they cover everything from that acquisition-learning split we talked about to how our student brain acts like a little editor in our head. We're going to zoom in on 2 of his most powerful concepts. Okay, his most famous idea is what's called the input hypothesis. You can think of it as the magic formula for acquiring a language. He basically said we only acquire language in one way, by understanding input that is just a little bit beyond what we already know. He called this I+1. The I is your current level, and the +1 is that next little step. So it's not so easy that you're bored and not so hard that you're lost. It's that perfect, sweet spot. And this next part is just as crucial. Krashen talked about an affective filter. Picture it like a wall. When we're stressed out, anxious, or just not feeling confident, that wall goes up. And it literally blocks language from getting into our brains, no matter how perfect that I+1 input is. But when we're relaxed, confident, and motivated, the wall comes down, the filter is low, and the language can just flow right in. This whole idea of a filter also helps explain the critical period you've probably heard about. That's the theory that before puberty, around age 13, our brains are just wired to be more open to language. You could almost say that for kids, that affective filter is just naturally super low. They're not worried about making mistakes, so the language gets in much easier. All right, so after all of that theory, Chomsky, Skinner, Krashen, what's the big secret here? What's the one thing you should take away from all of this if you're trying to learn a new language? It's actually pretty simple. Real fluency doesn't come from a textbook. True mastery happens when we stop acting only like a student and start waking up that inner toddler. We have to feed our toddler brain with low-stress, meaningful communication. That means watching movies you actually like, chatting with people without worrying about mistakes, reading fun stuff, anything that lets your brain's natural acquisition superpower get to work. So, I'll leave you with this question. Now that you know your brain is literally built for this stuff, what's one small thing you can do this week, not to study a language, but to just use it? How can you awaken your inner language acquirer? Maybe it's just putting on some music, watching a show, or finally trying to order that coffee. What's it going to be?